Elwood Thorne just fired his maid for breaking a $500,000 vase. He thinks it's the most expensive mistake she's ever made. You're a cockroach, Lisa. You'll spend the rest of your life starving in the dirt for this. But Lisa isn't crying. As she walks out the door, she taps a single key on a hidden device in her pocket. That vase wasn't an antique, Elwood. It was a signal jammer. And now that it's broken, the world is finally going to see the $4 billion hole in your balance sheet. While Elwood prepares to become a billionaire at tomorrow's IPO, the woman he just kicked to the curb has already bet $100 million that he'll be bankrupt by noon. He called me a cockroach. He's about to find out that when the world ends, only the cockroaches are left standing. In the cutthroat world of high finance, Elwood Thorne is the golden boy, a CEO weeks away from the biggest tech IPO of the decade. Lisa is his invisible maid, a woman he treats like furniture. But Lisa has a secret. She is the daughter of the man Elwood's father destroyed to build their empire. She didn't take this job for the paycheck. She took it for the access. For 6 months, she has been cleaning Elwood's office while secretly mapping his company's fraudulent accounting. The broken vase was the final piece of her game, a calculated distraction to cover her exit after she successfully cloned his master encryption key. Now, as Elwood prepares to ring the opening bell at the stock exchange, Lisa is operating from a basement war room, coordinating a massive short attack. She isn't just looking for a settlement, she's looking for total liquidation. By the time the closing bell rings, Elwood will have lost his company, his reputation, and his fortune to the woman he thought wasn't even worth a thank you. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comment where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The sound wasn't just a crash, it was the synchronized scream of $500,000 turning into jagged white dust. The Ming Dynasty vase, the crown jewel of Elwood Thorne's penthouse, lay pulverized against the Italian marble. Lisa stood over the wreckage, her breath hitching in her throat, her hands buried deep in the pockets of her cheap polyester apron. She didn't look up. She didn't have to. She could feel the temperature in the room drop 40 degrees as the heavy oak doors of the study swung open. "Tell me that wasn't the Ming," a voice drifted across the room, silk-wrapped and lethal. Elwood Thorne stepped into the light, his tailored charcoal suit catching the midday sun. He didn't look at the mess first, he looked at his watch. "I have a $3 billion IPO launch in exactly 24 hours, Lisa. I hired you to be invisible, not a catastrophe." It slipped, Mr. Thorne," Lisa stammered, her voice trembling with a perfect, practiced fragility. "The wax on the floor, Shut up!" The command was a whip crack. Elwood moved closer, his designer shoes crunching over a shard of priceless ceramic. He reached out, gripping her chin and forcing her head up until she was staring into the cold, vacuous blue of his eyes. "Do you even know what you are? You're a rounding error. You're the biological equivalent of a coffee stain. My father told me never to hire from the gutter, and here you are, proving him right by destroying a piece of history that your entire family tree couldn't afford if they worked for 1,000 years. He didn't just stop at the insult. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a gold money clip, and peeled off a single, crumpled $5 bill. He dropped it onto the shards at her feet. "There's your severance. Don't bother packing your things. If I see you on this property in 5 minutes, I'm calling the police to report a grand larceny. I'll make sure the headline says, 'Clumsy maid steals millions.' You'll be blacklisted from every cleaning agency from here to Singapore. You won't even be able to get a job scrubbing toilets in a bus station." Lisa's eyes welled with tears, a performance of pure, unadulterated terror. "Please, Mr. Thorne, I have nowhere to go. My father is—" "Your father is a loser, just like you," Elwood sneered, leaning in so close she could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "And tomorrow when I ring that bell at the Noacy, I'm going to forget you ever existed. Get out of my sight before I decide to have you arrested right now." He turned his back on her, already pulling his phone out to call his brokers, dismissing her as if she were a broken chair. Lisa knelt slowly, pretending to reach for her meager $5 severance. But as her fingers brushed the marble, they didn't go for the money. They slid into the dark cavity of the broken vase pedestal. Hidden beneath the structural base of the shattered ceramic was a small, glowing black box, a military-grade signal interceptor she had planted 3 months ago. With a sleight of hand born of years of desperation, she palmed the device, sliding it into the secret lining of her sleeve. She stood up, her face a mask of shattered dignity. She walked toward the elevator, her shoulders slumped. The image of a defeated woman. Elwood didn't even look up as the door slid shut. But the moment the elevator began its 60-floor descent, the transformation began. Lisa's back straightened. The trembling in her hands vanished. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a secondary encrypted phone. The screen flickered to life, showing a live data stream of Thorn International's private ledgers. The black ledger the world wasn't supposed to know existed. She tapped a command, and a cold crimson light filled the elevator car. "Signal intercept complete," a synthesized voice whispered. "Master encryption keys acquired. Total access granted." Lisa looked at her reflection in the polished chrome of the elevator doors. The maid was gone. In her place was the architect of a massacre. She looked at the $5 bill still clutched in her hand, and a ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Enjoy the champagne tonight, Elwood," she whispered to the empty car. "Because at 9:30 a.m. tomorrow, I'm not just taking your company. I'm taking the air out of your lungs." She pressed a button on the screen. "Initiate all short positions, 1.2 billion. A red warning flashed on the screen. "Extreme risk. Margin call will trigger if stock rises 1%. "Are you sure?" Lisa's thumb hovered over the yes button. If she timed this wrong, she wouldn't just be poor, she would be dead or in a federal cage. But she didn't hesitate. She pressed it. The elevator doors opened to the lobby. As she stepped out into the rain, her phone buzzed with a priority alert. It wasn't about the stocks. It was a private message from an unknown number that made her heart stop. "I saw what you took from the Vase, Lisa. If you want to live to see the opening bell, keep walking and don't look back. We're right behind you." Lisa froze. In the reflection of a parked black sedan across the street, she saw the flash of a suppressed barrel emerging from a tinted window. The cold rain of Manhattan felt like needles against Lisa's skin as she sprinted through the gridlock of Midtown, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The black sedan was a shadow in the corner of her eye, weaving through the yellow cabs with a predatory grace. She didn't head for the subway. That was a cage. Instead, she dived into the mouth of a narrow, trash-strewn alleyway in Hell's Kitchen, hitting a rusted metal door and punching a frantic code into a keypad hidden behind a loose brick. The door hissed shut just as a heavy thud echoed against the steel, the sound of a shoulder hitting the frame a second too late. Lisa didn't stop to breathe. She scrambled up 3 flights of concrete stairs and burst into a room that looked less like an apartment and more like the bridge of a starship. The transition was violent. She ripped off the damp, stained maid's apron, tossing the symbol of her humiliation into a trash can that already held a shredded $5,000 Chanel dress. Beneath the polyester uniform, she wore a compression suit designed to hide the contours of the hardware she'd been smuggling out of the Thorne mansion for months. She stepped into the center of the room, and the darkness was instantly cut by the blue glow of 12 ultra-wide monitors. "System active," she rasped, her voice no longer the stuttering whisper of a servant, but the sharp command of a general. "Biometric bypass engaged. Sync the black ledger." Wall Street knew her as the Ghost, the anonymous whale who had moved markets and broken hedge funds without ever leaving a fingerprint. But to Elwood Thorne, she was just the girl who didn't know how to polish silver. As her fingers flew across a custom mechanical keyboard, the screens ignited with a chaotic symphony of data. High-frequency trading algorithms began to hum, their cooling fans spinning up into a low-frequency roar. The stakes weren't just high, they were terminal. On the center screen, a red line tracked her $1.2 billion short position. Because she was trading on 100x leverage, even a tiny move upward in Elwood's stock before the crash would liquidate her entire account, leaving her with a debt that not even 3 lifetimes could repay. "Lisa, you're playing with fire," a voice crackled through an encrypted channel. It was Silas, her only ally, and the man who had been her father's head of security before the Thorne family destroyed him. Elwood's security team isn't just looking for a maid. They've flagged the data breach. They know the ghost is active. They're tracing the MAC address of the interceptor you pulled from the vase. Let them trace it, Lisa snapped, her eyes tracking a sudden, unexpected spike in the pre-market trading volume. By the time they find this floor, Elwood's net worth will be a negative number. Silas, look at the volume. Someone is trying to squeeze me out. Suddenly, the monitors flickered. A massive buy order for Thorne International shares flashed on the screen. A $500 million buy wall designed to drive the price up and trigger Lisa's margin call. He's protecting the IPO, she hissed, her teeth gritting as the red line on her screen began to climb toward the liquidation zone. He's using offshore shadow funds to artificially inflate the price before the bell. If it hits $195, I'm wiped out. Everything my father worked for, every cent I've clawed back, it's gone. The ticker hit $192, then $193 us. The room felt like it was losing oxygen. Lisa's fingers were a blur, writing a counterscript to flood the dark pools with the fraudulent accounting files she'd harvested. But the encryption on Elwood's private server was fighting back. A logic bomb had been triggered, a failsafe that was currently eating through her stolen data, erasing the evidence of Elwood's crimes before she could broadcast it to the SEC. "I'm losing the files!" she screamed, her composure finally cracking. "If that data wipes, I have no proof. I'm just a rogue trader committing market manipulation." $194.20. The warning sirens on her terminal began to wail, a high-pitched funeral dirge for her ambitions. "Lisa, get out of there!" Silas yelled through the comms. "The black sedan just pulled up to your building. They aren't waiting for the police. They have breaching charges." A dull boom shook the floor beneath her feet. The elevators in her building had been cut. They were coming up the stairs. Lisa looked at the screen. The stock was pennies away from her total ruin. The data was 98% erased. She had 5 seconds before the door to her sanctuary was blown off its hinges, and 3 seconds before she became the poorest person in New York. Her hand hovered over the emergency purge button. If she pressed it, she'd escape with her life but lose her revenge forever. If she stayed to finish the upload, she'd be trapped. The doorknob to her apartment began to turn. Then the screen turned bright gold. A final hidden file from the Vase decrypted itself, one she hadn't seen before. It wasn't an accounting ledger. It was a video file labeled "The Night of the Accident." Lisa's eyes widened as the first frame played. "No," she breathed, her finger freezing over the keyboard. "It wasn't just money. He killed him." The front door exploded in a shower of wood and steel. The roar of the breaching charge at her door faded into a high-pitched ring, a sound that harmonized with the scream echoing from the past. As the video file from the Vase flickered onto the center monitor, the world of high-tech monitors and tactical gear dissolved. Lisa wasn't in a war room anymore. She was 12 years old again, huddled in the back seat of a car, watching through the rain-streaked window as her life was set on fire. The footage was grainier than the livestock tickers, but the cruelty was high definition. It showed the interior of her father's study on the night of the Great Liquidation. Her father, Arthur Sterling, once the most respected man on the street, wasn't the broken alcoholic the news had portrayed. In the video, he was standing tall, holding a folder that contained the blueprint of the Thorne family's original sin, a massive insurance fraud that had birthed their empire. Then Elwood's father, the elder Thorne, stepped into frame. But it was the younger Elwood, barely 20 and already wearing arrogance like a second skin, who caught the light. "You don't understand, Arthur," the elder Thorne's voice hissed through the speakers. "The world doesn't care about the truth. They care about the winner. And tonight, you're the loser." On the screen, Elwood watched with a chilling, detached boredom as his father's security team forced Arthur to sign the confession that would strip him of his licenses, his wealth, and his reputation. But it was what happened after the signature that made Lisa's blood turn to ice. As her father reached for the phone to call his lawyer, Elwood didn't stop him with words. He stepped forward and shoved Arthur back. A shove that sent her father over the edge of the terrace. A fall the police had ruled a suicide of despair. The video cut to black. The reality of the present slammed back into the room with the force of a physical blow. Lisa, move! Silas's voice screamed through the comms, but she was paralyzed by the ghost on the screen. The door to her apartment didn't just open, it disintegrated. Three men in tactical gear, their faces obscured by matte black visors, swarmed through the smoke. These weren't corporate security guards. These were professional cleaners, the kind that didn't use mops. "The drive!" the lead man barked, his voice distorted by a comlink. "Secure the ghost and burn the servers." Lisa's survival instinct finally overrode the trauma. She dived behind her reinforced workstation just as a volley of suppressed gunfire shattered her secondary monitors. Sparks showered her like celebratory confetti for her own execution. She wasn't just fighting for a stock price anymore. She was the last witness to a murder. 194.85. The ticker was a heartbeat away from the liquidation line. If she lost the servers now, the short position would collapse, the video of her father's death would be deleted, and Elwood Thorne would become a god in the eyes of the market. "I'm not leaving without the upload," Lisa screamed, her fingers blind typing on a secondary tablet hidden beneath the desk. She didn't run for the fire escape. She ran toward the main server rack, the heat from the cooling fans blowing against her face. The lead gunman leveled his weapon at her chest. "Step away, girl. You're out of time." "You're wrong," Lisa said, her voice dropping to a terrifying, calm whisper. "I'm the only one who has time left." She didn't press a delete key. She pulled a physical copper lever she had installed for this exact moment. A dead man's drop. Instantly, the entire apartment's electrical system surged. The lights didn't just go out, they exploded. In the sudden pitch-black vacuum, the only light came from the small glowing LED on the signal jammer she'd taken from the vase. She had programmed it to trigger an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse, localized to this floor. The gunmen's high-tech visors went dark, blinding them. Their encrypted radios turned into shrieking static. In the chaos, Lisa grabbed the primary hard drive and vaulted over the workstation. She knew this room in the dark. She had lived in it for 3 years, dreaming of this night. She slipped through a narrow crawl space behind the server rack, a path she'd built for an exit that she hoped she'd never need. As she slid down the service chute, she heard the gunmen firing blindly into the dark behind her. She hit the basement floor, gasping for air, her clothes torn and her skin bruised. She was out of the building, but she was far from safe. She pulled out her phone. The market was 5 minutes from the opening bell. The stock price was frozen at $194.99, 1 cent away from her total destruction. But then her screen flashed with a notification that made her heart stop. It wasn't from the market. It was a GPS ping from a device she'd hidden in Elwood's private car. "He's not at the stock exchange," she whispered, looking at the map. "He's at the docks. He's leaving." She looked at the hard drive in her hand. She had the evidence to kill his company, but the man who killed her father was slipping away on a private yacht before the law could touch him. Suddenly, a pair of headlights cut through the darkness of the basement garage. A black sedan, the same one from the alley, screeched to a halt 10 feet away. The window rolled down. It wasn't a hitman inside. It was Elwood's wife, her face pale and her eyes wide with terror. "Get in," she gasped. "If you want to stop him, we have to go now. He's not just leaving the country, Lisa. He's taking your father's body with him." The roar of the sedan's engine faded into the sharp, rhythmic shik-shik of a vacuum cleaner, the sound of Lisa's camouflage. To Elwood Thorne, the noise was nothing more than the background hum of his own greatness. To Lisa, it was the frequency of war. She stood in the center of Elwood's private study, the inner sanctum where billion-dollar fates were sealed with a cigar and a whisper. For 6 months, she had played the role of the invisible girl, the girl who didn't understand the big words on the documents she dusted. She had trained herself to keep her heart rate below 60 beats per minute, even as she stood inches away from the man who had murdered her father. "Move it, Lisa!" Elwood had snapped 3 months prior, not even looking up from his mahogany desk. "That dust on the baseboards is distracting me. How hard is it to wipe a floor?" "I'm sorry, Mr. Thorne," she had whispered, her eyes fixed on the rug. But as she knelt to clean those baseboards, her hands weren't holding a rag. They were deploying a sophisticated mesh network of fiber optic microphones, thinner than a human hair, into the seams of the wood. The escalation had been a slow, agonizing crawl. Week 1, the microphones. Week 4, the keystroke logger embedded in the underside of his gold-plated keyboard. Week 12, the most dangerous play of all. Lisa had realized that Elwood's most sensitive conversations happened only when he turned on a military-grade scrambler that sat disguised as a decorative crystal paperweight. To beat it, she didn't need to hack it. She needed to replace it. She remembered the night she had swapped the components. Her hands had been slick with sweat as she worked in the dark, the shadow of a security guard passing the frosted glass door every 60 seconds. She had dismantled the scrambler and rebuilt it with a dual-channel transmitter that didn't just scramble the room. It recorded the clear audio and bounced it off the building's own Wi-Fi before deleting the trace. Every time she cleaned his office, she was actually harvesting the crop of his crimes. She had watched him through the pinhole camera she'd installed in the eyes of a portrait of his father, seeing him cook the books, bribe senators, and laugh about the unfortunate accident that had cleared his family's path to the top. But now, as the black sedan sped toward the docks in the present day, the stakes shifted from surveillance to survival. "The files," Elwood's wife Catherine whispered as she gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. "You think you know what's on them, but you don't. You only saw the money. You didn't see the why." "I saw him kill my father," Lisa said, her voice a cold blade. "That's all the why I need." "No," Catherine gasped, swerving through a red light as the lights of the harbor began to shimmer in the distance. "Elwood didn't kill him for the insurance money. He killed him because your father found out where the Thorne family's original seed money came from. It wasn't fraud, Lisa. It was blood." Lisa pulled up the final unpurged folder on her tablet. The data she had bugged from the inner sanctum was finally finishing its decryption. The black box file she'd spent months hunting wasn't a ledger of trades. It was a list of names, politicians, judges, and high-ranking officials who all shared a secret. The Thorne family wasn't just a corporation. They were a clearinghouse for international blackmail. Suddenly, the tablet screen began to glitch. A high-frequency pulse hit the car's electronics. The dashboard lights flickered and died. The steering went stiff as the power steering failed. "He knows," Lisa hissed, looking at the rearview mirror. A fleet of black SUVs was closing in, their high beams blinding. "He's using the city's localized grid to shut us down." Behind them, the lead SUV accelerated, ramming into their bumper with a bone-jarring impact. Catherine screamed as the car fishtailed toward the edge of the pier. Lisa looked at her screen one last time. The stock price for Thorne International was still frozen at $194.99, just 1 cent away from her destruction. But a new alert popped up, a broadcast from Elwood himself, standing on the deck of his yacht, being streamed live to every major news outlet. "I'd like to announce a special dividend," Elwood's voice boomed from her speakers, smooth and triumphant. "To celebrate our IPO, Thorne International is performing a massive buyback. We are going to squeeze every short position out of existence by noon." The stock ticker jumped. 195 ducks. A red liquidation warning filled Lisa's screen. Her entire $1.2 billion position was being vaporized in real time. She was losing everything: the money, the revenge, and her father's legacy. "He's winning," Catherine sobbed as the car skidded to a halt at the very edge of the dark, churning water. "He's going to get away with all of it." Lisa looked out the window. The yacht was pulling away from the pier. But then she saw it, the broken Ming vase she had shattered earlier. It wasn't in the penthouse. A man in a suit was carrying a briefcase onto the yacht, and inside the briefcase, visible through a small gap, was a single, shimmering shard of that blue and white porcelain. Lisa's eyes went wide. She realized the vase wasn't just a signal jammer. It was the physical key to the Thorne family's encrypted vault, the only place where the original hard copies of the blackmail were kept. "He's not leaving the country with the money," Lisa whispered, her hand going to the door handle as the SUV surrounded them. "He's leaving with the world's secrets." The door to her side of the car was ripped open. A man with a silenced pistol pointed it at her head. "The boss wants his shard back, Lisa," the man growled, "and he wants you to watch him ring the bell before we put you in the water." The deck of the Thorne Sovereign was a cathedral of glass, chrome, and unbridled ego. While the city below huddled in the gray morning mist, Elwood Thorne's pre-IPO gala was bathed in the artificial gold of 1,000 champagne flutes. The air smelled of expensive salt air and even more expensive desperation. Elwood stood at the center of a circle of senators and sovereign wealth fund managers, his laughter booming over the soft hum of the yacht's engines. In his hand, he swirled a glass of vintage cristal, while his other hand played absent-mindedly with a jagged, shimmering shard of blue and white porcelain. It was the heart of the Ming vase, the piece that contained the biometric signature to his family's offshore vault. "You should have seen her face," Elwood chuckled, leaning into the huddle of power brokers. "This little cockroach, Lisa, trembling on her knees, begging me for mercy. She thought she was clever, hiding in the shadows of my home. She actually thought she could break a piece of history and walk away. I didn't just fire her. I erased her. By the time the markets open, she won't have enough credit to buy a pack of gum, let alone a bus ticket out of the city." The elites laughed in unison, a chorus of hyenas celebrating a fresh kill. "To the Maid," one investor toasted, raising his glass. "The most expensive cleaning lady in history." But the laughter was cut short as the heavy steel doors to the VIP lounge were kicked open. Two security guards stumbled backward, followed by a woman who looked nothing like the girl Elwood had humiliated 24 hours ago. Lisa walked onto the deck, her face bruised but her eyes burning with a cold, terrifying clarity. She was flanked by the men who had just arrested her at the pier, but she wasn't in handcuffs. She walked straight to the center of the gala, stopping inches from Elwood. The silence that followed was so thick it felt like it could be cut with a knife. Elwood didn't flinch. He let out a slow, mocking grin and drained his glass. "Well, well, if it isn't the ghost of my living room. I told my men to bring you here so you could witness perfection before you disappear." "Look at the screens, Lisa." He pointed to the massive LED walls lining the deck. The pre-market ticker for Thorne International was screaming upward. 198 internationals, 205 nationals, 215 nationals. "The short squeeze is total," Elwood whispered, his voice dripping with venom. "I've spent the last 3 hours buying every available share. I've drained my personal reserves just to watch your little, short position go up in smoke. You thought you were a trader? You're a bug on a windshield and I just turned on the wipers." Lisa didn't look at the screens. She looked at the shard in his hand. "You think you're winning because the numbers are going up, Elwood, but you forgot how you built this house. You built it on a foundation of shards." "Is that a threat?" Elwood laughed, turning to his guests. "She's threatening me with philosophy. Lisa, I'm about to become the richest man under 40. I own the banks. I own the SEC. And in 10 minutes, I'm going to own your soul." He stepped closer, his face inches from hers. "I killed your father, Lisa. I watched the light go out of his eyes. And the world gave me a standing ovation for it. What do you think they're going to do to you?" The escalation was a physical weight. One of the security guards stepped forward, his hand on the butt of his weapon. The guests began to murmur, sensing the air turn lethal. Lisa reached into her pocket. The guards tensed, their fingers tightening on their triggers. But she didn't pull out a gun. She pulled out a small, battered silver coin, the $5 severance Elwood had thrown at her. "You told me accidents are for people who matter," Lisa said, her voice echoing across the deck. "You were right. The vase wasn't the accident. This is." She flicked the coin. It didn't hit the floor. It hit the base of the yacht's master control console, the nerve center for his $100 million buyback algorithm. A tiny blue spark jumped from the coin to the console. Suddenly, the gold-tinted lights on the yacht flickered and died. The music cut to a horrifying silence. The only light remaining was the blood-red glow of the stock tickers. The numbers didn't just stop. They began to reverse. 215 directions, 180 directions, 150 hours. "What did you do?" Elwood screamed, his face twisting in a mask of primal rage. He lunged for the console, but the screens were already flashing a message that turned his blood to ice. Internal fraud alert. All buyback orders canceled by keyholder 01. Lisa smiled, and it was the most dangerous thing Elwood had ever seen. "I didn't just bug your office, Elwood. I bugged the shard. Elwood looked down at the porcelain in his hand. A tiny microscopic light was blinking inside the ceramic. It wasn't just a key to a vault, it was a Trojan horse. You brought the virus onto the yacht yourself, Lisa whispered. At that exact moment, the horizon was flooded with the spinning blue and red lights of the Coast Guard and the FBI. But they weren't the most terrifying thing in the water. A massive black shadow began to rise from the depths of the harbor, right beneath the yacht. It was a salvage barge, and hanging from its crane was a rusted, waterlogged car, the same car Lisa's father had been pushed from 12 years ago. The body isn't in the car, Elwood, Lisa said as the yacht began to tilt violently. It's under your feet. The deck plates beneath Elwood's feet began to buckle as something from inside the hull started to scream. The Thorn Sovereign groaned, a deep, metallic shudder that vibrated through the soles of Elwood's handmade leather shoes. Panic, sharp and acidic, began to replace the champagne-fueled bravado of the elite guests. As the stock ticker on the wall plummeted toward double digits, the world's most powerful men began to scramble for the lifeboats like rats on a sinking galley. Fix it, Elwood roared at his CTO, his face a contorted mask of fury. I poured $500 million into that buyback. How is the algorithm canceling my orders? We can't, sir, the technician screamed back, his fingers frantic over a tablet that was bleeding red error codes. The command is coming from inside the biometric vault. It's using your father's dead man's signature. It's like a ghost has taken over the server. Lisa stood perfectly still amidst the chaos, the wind whipping her hair across her face. She looked at the shard still clutched in Elwood's trembling hand, the shimmering piece of the Ming Vase. You always wondered why I was so clumsy, didn't you, Elwood? Lisa's voice was low, cutting through the sirens like a cooling breeze. You thought I was overwhelmed by the weight of your wealth. But the vase had to break. It was the only way to get the jammer into the light. Elwood looked at the shard, then back at her, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrific realization. The vase. It was just a shell. My father didn't just leave me a legacy of debt, Elwood. He left me the original blueprints for the Thorn security architecture. He built the vault your father stole, Lisa said, stepping closer as the yacht tilted further into the dark Atlantic. The Ming Vase wasn't an antique. It was a high-frequency acoustic resonator. For 6 months while I was dusting it, I was actually tuning it to the specific vibration of your vocal cords. The escalation hit a fever pitch. On the monitors, the SEC's official website refreshed. A banner headline flashed, Thorn International Trading halted pending investigation into massive fraud. The moment that vase hit your marble floor, Lisa continued, the sound it made wasn't just glass breaking. It was a pre-recorded sonic key. It mimicked the frequency of your voice admitting to the 2014 offshore embezzlement. The conversation I recorded while I was cleaning your study. That sound triggered the jammer hidden in the pedestal. It didn't just block your signals, Elwood. It broadcasted your confession directly to the Federal Clearinghouse servers. Elwood lunged for her, his fingers clawing at the air, but the yacht gave another violent lurch. The rusted car being hoisted by the salvage barge nearby swung like a pendulum, the metal shrieking as it scraped against the yacht's hull. You're lying, Elwood screamed. The vault is physical. It's in the hull. No signal can get in or out. I know, Lisa whispered. That's why I didn't send a signal in. I waited for you to take the key out. She pointed to the shard. The microscopic light inside the porcelain was no longer blinking. It was a solid, steady blue. The jammer wasn't meant to stop the world from hearing you. It was meant to stop you from hearing the world. While you were laughing about crushing a maid, that shard was slaving your yacht's navigation system to the salvage barge's crane. You aren't drifting, Elwood. You're being towed. Suddenly, the deck beneath them erupted. A massive pressure release valve blew, spraying freezing seawater and hydraulic fluid into the air. The body Catherine had mentioned wasn't just a metaphor. The salvage crane ripped the roof off the submerged car, and as the rusted metal peeled back, it revealed a waterproof, vacuum-sealed briefcase welded to the floorboards. The same one Arthur Sterling had been holding when he fell. That's the original Black Ledger, Lisa said, her voice trembling with the first sign of real emotion. The one your father thought he threw into the harbor with my dad. But my father was smarter than both of you. He didn't jump, Elwood. He was pushed, and he made sure he took the evidence with him to a place only I could find it. Elwood's face went pale. He looked at the briefcase, then at the FBI choppers now hovering directly overhead, their spotlights turning the deck into a blinding arena of judgment. "I'll burn it," Elwood screamed, reaching for a flare gun on the console. "I'll sink this ship and everyone on it before I let you have that ledger." He aimed the flare gun not at Lisa, but at the salvage barge's fuel line. But as his finger tightened on the trigger, his own phone chirped with a final, automated notification from his secure vault. It wasn't a stock update. It was a live video feed from inside the vault located in the yacht's hull. The screen showed a dark, cramped space and a pair of eyes reflecting the light of a flashlight. Someone was already inside. Someone who wasn't Lisa. The person in the vault turned the camera toward a ticking device wired directly into the ship's fuel cells. "Wait," Elwood gasped, his hand shaking. "Who is that?" The voice that came through the yacht's speakers was distorted, but Lisa recognized it instantly. It wasn't Silas. "The maid wasn't the only one you underestimated, Elwood," the voice whispered. "Did you really think I'd let you leave the country with my children's inheritance?" The timer on the screen hit 0. The 0 on the timer didn't bring an explosion of fire, but an explosion of data. The yacht's engines died instantly, leaving the massive vessel to wallow in the swells like a slaughtered whale. On the deck, the silence was more terrifying than the sirens. Elwood stood frozen, his phone still displaying the live feed from the vault, where his own wife, Catherine, stared back at him with a coldness that rivaled Lisa's. She hadn't planted a bomb. She had planted a bypass. "The markets are open," Lisa whispered. At that exact second, 9:30 struck. Somewhere in the heart of the city, a bell rang, and the digital world descended into a bloodbath. Lisa pulled a ruggedized tablet from her jacket, her fingers dancing across the screen with the lethal precision of a concert pianist. The pre-market buyback wall that Elwood had built with his stolen billions began to crumble. "Initiate phase 1, Lisa commanded into her headset. "Dump everything." On the giant LED screens of the yacht, the Thorn International ticker began to vibrate. It wasn't just a drop, it was a vertical cliff. $215, $170, $120. Every time the price tried to stabilize, a fresh wave of multi-million-dollar sell orders hit the tape. Lisa wasn't just selling the stock she had, she was using the stolen encryption keys to naked short Elwood's own private holdings, selling shares he didn't even know were being moved. "You're stealing from me," Elwood shrieked, lunging at her. He was intercepted by his own head of security, who looked at his tablet and saw his own pension fund evaporating in real time. The guard stepped aside, letting Elwood stumble. "The keys are biometric, Lisa. You can't authorize those trades." "I don't need your thumbprint, Elwood," Lisa said, not looking up as she executed a $50 million block trade. "I have your conscience. Every time your heart rate spikes over 120, the biosensor in the vase shard you're holding acts as a digital signature. You're literally authorizing your own bankruptcy with every beat of your panicked heart." The escalation surged. Across the water, the salvage crane finally broke the surface with the briefcase. But as it swung toward the deck, a black tactical helicopter, bearing no markings, veered away from the FBI formation and hovered dangerously close to the yacht's helipad. "Silas, who is that?" Lisa barked into her comms. "It's not the feds, Lisa. It's the clearinghouse." Silas's voice was distorted by heavy static. "The people Elwood owes money to, the real power behind the Thorn name. They aren't here to arrest him. They're here to liquidate the evidence." The helicopter's side door slid open, and a sniper leveled a high-caliber rifle. But he wasn't aiming at Lisa. He was aiming at the briefcase dangling from the crane. Crack! The steel cable snapped. The briefcase plunged back toward the dark, churning water. "No!" Lisa screamed, her composure finally shattering. She dived toward the railing, but the yacht took a violent list as the bypass Catherine had triggered began to flood the lower ballasts. On the screen, the stock hit 40 tall yards. The margin calls were triggering globally. Elwood's net worth was being deleted at a rate of $10 million a second. He watched, catatonic, as the billionaire status next to his name flickered and disappeared, replaced by a negative sign that grew longer and longer. "Stop it," Elwood pleaded, falling to his knees as the elite guest began jumping into the freezing water to escape the tilting ship. "I'll give you the names. I'll give you the vault. Just stop the trades." "It's too late for trades, Elwood," Lisa said, her voice trembling with a mix of triumph and terror. "The short attack is automated now. It won't stop until the value hits zero, or until you do." The black helicopter descended, the downdraft from its rotors whipping the sea into a frenzy. A rope ladder dropped, and two men in tactical masks hit the deck. They didn't go for Elwood. They went for the shard in his hand, the key to the blackmail vault. Lisa looked from the men to the spot where the briefcase had hit the water. She had the choice: stay and finish the financial execution of the man who killed her father, or dive into the dark Atlantic to save the only proof of his crimes before it sank into the abyss. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the hull, not from the vault, but from the engine room. The Thorn Sovereign began to split down the middle. "Lisa, the drive is sinking," Silas yelled, "and the yacht is going down in 3 minutes." Lisa looked at Elwood, who was crawling toward the mercenaries, begging for help. She looked at the stock ticker one last time. $0 Then she looked at the dark, cold water where her father's legacy was disappearing. Without a word, she turned and sprinted toward the edge of the sinking ship. But as she prepared to jump, a hand gripped her ankle. It was Elwood. His face was a mask of bloody desperation. "If I'm going down," he hissed, "you're coming into the dark with me." Behind him, the mercenaries raised their weapons, and the yacht's bridge exploded in a fireball. The world was screaming. The Thorn Sovereign groaned as the secondary explosions ripped through the lower decks. But for Elwood Thorn, the loudest sound was the digital silence of his disappearing fortune. He lay on the tilting deck, his hand clamped like a vice around Lisa's ankle, his eyes bloodshot and wide with a frantic, unhinged denial. Even now, with the ship dying beneath him and the markets in a state of total collapse, his mind refused to accept the truth standing right in front of him. "Who is it?" Elwood shrieked over the roar of the fire. "Is it the Vanguard Group? Did the Miller brothers buy you off? How much did they pay a pathetic maid to plant that virus? I'll double it. I'll triple it." Lisa looked down at him, her silhouette framed by the orange glow of the burning bridge. She didn't try to kick him away. She simply watched him crumble. "You still don't get it, do you, Elwood? You're looking for a corporate giant, a rival king. You can't even conceive of the idea that you were brought down by the woman who cleaned your toilets." "Don't lie to me," Elwood roared, his voice breaking. "A girl like you doesn't know how to bypass a level 7 encryption? This is a state-level hit. This is a coup." He scrambled to his feet, still clutching her, his head whipping around as he scanned the black horizon. He saw the unmarked helicopter hovering above, the mercenaries sliding down the fast ropes. In his twisted logic, they weren't his enemies. They were his salvation. "There, the clearinghouse. They're here to protect the asset. You're dead, Lisa. You and whoever hired you." The escalation turned lethal as the first mercenary hit the deck. He didn't offer a hand to Elwood. He raised a suppressed submachine gun and fired a burst into the yacht's main communication array, silencing the distress calls. The guest who had been screaming for a lifeboat was silenced by a cold, efficient blow to the temple. These men weren't here to save a billionaire. They were here to harvest the hard drives and leave no witnesses to the Thorn family's collapse. "Identify yourself," Elwood commanded, trying to straighten his scorched suit, regaining a pathetic shred of his old authority. "I am Elwood Thorn. I have the shard. I have the codes." The lead mercenary stepped forward, the red laser of his sight dancing across Elwood's forehead. "The clearinghouse doesn't back losers, Mr. Thorn, and currently you are the largest liability on the planet." "Wait, no, it's the Maid. She's the one who triggered the short." Elwood pointed a trembling finger at Lisa, his voice rising in a panicked pitch. "She has the terminal. She's the ghost. If you kill her, you can stop the liquidation. I'm still the CEO. I can fix this." The mercenary turned the laser toward Lisa. "Is that true?" the masked man growled, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Are you the one holding the kill switch?" Lisa didn't flinch. She felt the vibration of the yacht's hull, a deep, rhythmic thud. It wasn't the engine. It was the salvage crane, still struggling with the submerged briefcase just yards away. She knew that if she died now, the automated short would finish Elwood. But the truth about her father would stay buried in the Atlantic forever. The kill switch is biometric, Lisa lied, her voice steady as the deck tilted a further 10 degrees, sending a luxury SUV sliding off the helipad and into the sea. My heart stops. The Black Ledger goes live on every public server from New York to Tokyo. You want the vault? You want the blackmail? You need me alive to decrypt the shard. Elwood looked at her, his jaw dropping. You're bluffing. You're just a maid. I was a maid for 6 months, Lisa said, turning her gaze to the dark water where the briefcase was bobbing. I've been a ghost for 12 years. Suddenly, the crane cable snapped for the second time, but this time, it wasn't a sniper shot. The salvage barge itself was being pulled toward the sinking yacht. The two vessels were on a collision course. "The shard!" the mercenary barked, reaching for Elwood's hand. In a moment of pure, panicked instinct, Elwood didn't hand it over. He realized that the piece of porcelain was his only life insurance. He turned and bolted toward the stern, but the ship gave a violent, final lurch. The railing snapped, and Elwood Thorne, the King of Wall Street, was pitched headfirst into the freezing, oil-slick darkness of the ocean. "The asset is in the water!" the mercenary yelled into his comms. Lisa didn't hesitate. She knew Elwood couldn't swim. It was a secret she learned from his medical files months ago. But more importantly, he was still holding the key. She dived. The shock of the Atlantic was like hitting a wall of ice. She surfaced, gasping, the taste of salt and diesel fuel in her mouth. Through the fog and the smoke, she saw two things. To her left, the briefcase was sinking, the weighted lock dragging it down. To her right, Elwood was thrashing, the blue light of the shard still glowing in his white-knuckled grip. And coming straight at them, the black helicopter lowered its skids to the surface of the water, a mercenary leaning out with a harpoon gun. He wasn't aiming for the shard. He was aiming for the briefcase. "Silas!" Lisa screamed, but her headset was dead. As she swam toward the sinking ledger, she felt something heavy wrap around her waist. She looked down. In the darkness beneath the surface, Elwood's hands had found her again, his weight pulling her down into the depths as he struggled to use her as a float. The shard slipped from his hand, sinking slowly like a falling star toward the bottom of the bay. Lisa was trapped between a drowning murderer, a sinking legacy, and a mercenary about to fire. The Atlantic was a cold, unforgiving grave, but for Elwood Thorne, the real drowning was happening on dry land. As he clawed at Lisa in the oil-slick swells, his grip failing, the digital world he had spent a lifetime building was being systematically dismantled. Above them, the burning skeleton of the Thorne Sovereign cast a hellish orange light on the water, while miles away, in the marble halls of the New York Stock Exchange, the atmosphere was even more lethal. The SEC didn't just move in, they descended like a tactical unit. In the frantic minutes following the Black Ledger upload, the Commission had invoked the emergency suspension of all Thorne International securities. It was a total liquidation. On the trading floor, the massive digital screens that were supposed to display Elwood's triumphant face instead showed a stark, scrolling list of federal indictments. The IPO hadn't just failed, it had become the largest criminal forfeiture in American history. Every offshore account, every shadow fund, and every luxury asset tied to the Thorne name was being frozen in real time. The King of Wall Street was being stripped of his crown while he fought for air in a sea of diesel fuel. "My money," Elwood gurgled, his eyes bulging as he stared at the glowing tablet floating just out of reach in the wreckage. It's all gone." "It was never yours, Elwood," Lisa rasped, her lungs burning as she kicked against his dead weight. She could see the blue light of the shard sinking further into the abyss, and for a second, she felt the temptation to let the water take both of them. The escalation intensified as the mercenaries in the helicopter realized the game had changed. They weren't looking for a billionaire anymore. They were looking for a scapegoat. The lead mercenary signaled the pilot. The helicopter dipped lower, the rotors kicking up a blinding spray of seawater that felt like shrapnel. "The vault is dead!" the mercenary screamed over the comms, his voice audible even over the crashing waves. The girl's virus wiped the biometric backups. The only thing left is the physical ledger in that briefcase. The harpoon gun fired. The steel bolt hissed through the air, narrowly missing Lisa's head, and thudded into the weighted briefcase just as it began its final descent into the deep. The cable pulled taut. The mercenaries began to winch the truth out of the water, and with it, Lisa's only hope for justice. "No!" Lisa screamed, reaching out with one hand while the other tried to shove a panicked Elwood away. But Elwood wasn't trying to save himself anymore. Realizing he had lost the money, the power, and the legacy, his mind snapped into a final, suicidal spite. He wrapped his arms around Lisa's waist, his face a mask of twisted, hysterical laughter. "If I go to prison, I go alone. But if I go to hell, I'm taking you as my guest." He began to pull her down, his weight dragging her beneath the surface. Lisa fought, her nails digging into his arms, but the cold was beginning to paralyze her muscles. Above the water, the briefcase was being hauled into the belly of the black helicopter. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the chaos, a deep, resonant roar that shook the very surface of the bay. A massive, high-speed Coast Guard interceptor burst through the fog, its searchlights cutting through the dark like a divine judgment. "Federal agents, drop the winch!" a voice boomed over a megaphone. The mercenaries didn't comply. They opened fire. A hail of bullets sparked against the Coast Guard vessel's hull, and the bay turned into a war zone. Tracer rounds streaked across the sky, reflecting in the water as Lisa and Elwood sank deeper into the dark. Lisa felt the pressure building in her ears. The light from the surface was fading. She looked at Elwood, whose eyes were wide and blank, a man already dead in every way that mattered. Then she saw it, the shard. It hadn't sunk into the deep. It had caught on the hem of Elwood's heavy wool coat. It was glowing a frantic, strobing red. Lisa realized that total liquidation hadn't just been about the money. The virus she had planted had a final protocol, one she had forgotten in the heat of the chase. If the biometric keyholder's vitals dropped below a certain threshold while in proximity to the primary drive, the nuclear option would trigger. The shard wasn't just a key anymore, it was a beacon. As the Coast Guard and the mercenaries traded fire above, a massive explosion erupted not from the ship, but from the briefcase itself as it entered the helicopter. It wasn't fire. It was a blinding, white-hot magnesium flare designed to incinerate the documents and the hardware instantly, leaving nothing but ash. The helicopter swerved, losing altitude, the briefcase falling back into the water as a flaming wreckage. Lisa broke Elwood's grip with a final desperate surge of adrenaline. She breached the surface, gasping for air, and saw the briefcase sinking for the third and final time, surrounded by a cloud of black ash and burning embers. But as she reached for it, she felt a cold, metallic hand grab her shoulder. It wasn't Elwood. It wasn't a mercenary. It was a diver in a high-tech suit, his face obscured by a black mask. He held a secondary briefcase, one that looked identical to the one that had just been destroyed. He leaned in close to Lisa's ear, his voice a low, terrifying hum. "The ghost isn't the only one who knows how to play the market, Lisa. Your father didn't die for a ledger. He died for what was under it." The diver shoved a fresh oxygen mask onto her face and pulled her down into the darkness, just as the Thorn Sovereign made its final vertical plunge into the sea. The sunrise over Manhattan was a cold, indifferent gold, bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Thorn International penthouse. The office, once a cathedral of stolen power, was a skeletal ruin. The mahogany desk was stripped. The servers were gone. The only thing remaining was the deafening silence of a dead empire. Elwood Thorn sat on the floor in the center of the room. His $8,000 suit was stained with salt and oil, his hair matted, his eyes staring vacantly at the spot where the Ming vase had once stood. He looked less like a king and more like a ghost that had forgotten to vanish with the night. The door hissed open, and the click of expensive heels echoed against the marble. Lisa walked in. She was no longer the girl in the polyester apron, nor the bruised survivor in the Atlantic. She wore a tailored suit of midnight blue, her hair sharp, her gaze a frost that could crack stone. In her hand, she carried a small, leather-bound folder, the original sterling deeds, recovered from the diver who had worked for her father's secret trust all along. The movers are downstairs, Elwood, Lisa said, her voice echoing in the hollow space. They're very efficient. They'll be taking the furniture, the art, and the light fixtures. Apparently, when you owe $4 billion to the federal government, they don't leave you a chair to cry in. Elwood looked up, his lips trembling. You were the diver. You staged the explosion. You burned the fake ledger to keep the feds off the real one. I learned from the best, Lisa replied, stepping closer. Your father taught me that the world belongs to the winner. My father taught me that the winner is just the person who holds the last secret. I don't just own your stock, Elwood. I bought your debt. Every cent you owe to the banks, the offshore cartels, and the IRS. I'm the primary lien holder. You don't belong to the state. You belong to me. The escalation was a slow, agonizing tightening of a noose. Elwood scrambled to his feet, his face twisting into a final, pathetic snarl of arrogance. You think this is over? I still have friends. I have names in that ledger that can burn the city to the ground. You'll never be able to use that evidence without killing yourself in the process. I'm not using the ledger to burn the city, Elwood, Lisa said, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. I'm using it to buy it. While you were fighting for your life in the water, I was closing a deal with the very people you were trying to blackmail. They've agreed to let me manage their interests in exchange for your total silence. You aren't a player anymore. You're a liability they've authorized me to dispose of. Elwood's face went translucent. He looked at the shadows in the hallway, the silhouettes of men in dark suits who didn't look like police. He realized then that Lisa hadn't just beaten him at the market. She had replaced him in the food chain. Lisa reached into a small bucket she had brought with her. She pulled out a damp gray cleaning rag, the same one he had mocked her with 6 months ago. She walked forward and pressed it into his trembling hand. There's a coffee stain by the baseboard, Elwood, she said, her eyes boring into his, and a smudge on the glass where you watched your life fall apart. Since you have no assets, no references, and a criminal record that makes you unemployable, I've decided to be charitable. I'm hiring you. You can stay in this building. You'll sleep in the basement locker room. You'll clean the floors you used to walk on, and if you miss a single spot, I'll hand that ledger to the men in the hallway. Elwood looked at the rag, then at the door, then back at the woman he had called a cockroach. He fell back to his knees, clutching the damp cloth, as if it were the only thing keeping him from drifting into the void. Lisa turned and walked toward the exit, her mission complete, her father's name finally cleared in the only way Wall Street understood, through total conquest. She reached the threshold and paused, her hand on the heavy oak door. Oh, and Elwood, she said, not looking back. Don't bother looking for the shard. I melted it down. I needed the biometric data to open your father's other vault. Elwood froze. Other vault? There is no other vault. Lisa finally turned, a predatory smile playing on her lips. She held up a small black key card she had retrieved from the very bottom of the Ming vase's pedestal, a piece she hadn't revealed until now. The one in Switzerland, Elwood. The one labeled Sterling Thorn Joint Venture, 1992. The one that contains the evidence that my father isn't actually dead. The rag fell from Elwood's hand. The elevator chimes rang, but as the doors opened, Lisa didn't step in. She saw a man standing inside, his face hidden in the shadows of a wide-brimmed hat, holding a phone that was vibrating with a call from a number that shouldn't exist. The man looked at Lisa and spoke a single word that turned her victory into a new kind of terror. Run!